This is Wendy Halley, and you're listening to Lucid Cafe. Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Lucid Cafe. In today's episode, I'm joined by author and neuro-affirming life coach Sol Smith for a thoughtful and deeply personal conversation about autism, with a specific focus on high-functioning adults, their identity, and self-discovery. Sol shares his journey of being diagnosed with autism in adulthood and what inspired him to write The Autistic's Guide to Self-Discovery, Flourishing as a Neurodivergent Adult. Together, in our conversation, we explore the often overlooked nuances of autistic experience, including high masking, social challenges, intense versus narrow interests, and the impact of societal stigma. Sol also speaks to the barriers many autistic adults face in accessing professional diagnoses, the importance of self-diagnosis, and the vital role community support groups play in fostering belonging and understanding. So Sol has been a college instructor for 20 years, specializing in mindset, happiness, and self-liberation courses. As a life coach and neurodivergent consultant, he's had the privilege of helping numerous individuals realize their own potential, embracing paths that exist beyond the confines of societal molds. So please enjoy my illuminating conversation with Sol Smith. Sol, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
All right, so you have a new book out. It's called The Autistic's Guide to Self-Discovery. Your subtitle is Flourishing as a Neurodivergent Adult. So let's just start with a basic question. What prompted you to write this book and to share your story?
Yeah, I've been working with autistic folks for a long time. I realized I was autistic somewhere around 2020, diagnosed maybe 2 years afterwards. It's a long process for a lot of us. And I have been working with autistic folks since then. And, working as a life coach, access is a real problem. It's expensive because there's no structure sort of holding us in place, and you have to make it be worth your time to be able to do this. And I am always trying to look for ways that I can try to make it more accessible to more people. So the book was just a really sort of logical step in that process. And I had it in my mind that I was going to do that at some point. But I have been writing since I was, in high school, and I've been hunting down publishers since I was in college. And it's a really unrewarding process. So I wasn't like
familiar with that.
right. I always say that it's a young man's game. I spent my 20s just mailing out all the time to agents and stuff and publishers and going to writing conventions. What are they called? God, there's a name for it. Anyway, but I
get the idea.
Yeah. And so I just kind of had it on the back burner that I'm going to write this book. It's going to be fine once I get some time. And of course, time kept not coming. And then I had somebody who followed me, who works for the San Francisco Writers Conference. And she said, hey, a couple of weeks, the writers conference is happening. You should really come up here. And I was like, that's way too late for me to register. I don't have anything ready. And she said, no, I really think you should. I think that I'm sure you have a book in you and you could throw something together. And I just was like, what the heck? Like, I was in the habit of trying to jump on every opportunity that popped up. So I got my college to pay for me to go up there. And it is very different going to a writers conference when you are trying to sell a book and you have nothing sort of like on your resume, and when you have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. And that, of course, is irritating to me because I had people falling all over themselves wanting to talk with me who have turned down, 5, 6 novels. And I'm like, I'm the same guy you turned down stuff for. Like, the only thing that changed here is now I can sell for you. And that kind of, but that being said, I found a great team. It was a fantastic experience, and that was really what was the sort of linchpin in this process that and I only bring this up because I think that writers need to know this, that you hear all these success stories about writing, and it is really true. it's easier when you know the paycheck is coming. So writers who are established and you talk about their writing process and stuff, it's very different for those of us who are struggling for year after year.
I
You
know.
know?
It sounds like you were writing fiction before you wrote this book.
Mostly, yeah, mostly.
And it's a tough market to break into.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking from experience, and a lot of people are pursuing writing now. So really crowded.
Playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
Playing
is.
field. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. But this book is not fiction. It is
No. Yeah.
nonfiction. And so what prompted you to write this particular book?
This
Like what?
particular book.
Yeah.
Okay. I had recently finished in 2022, I'd finished my master's in psychology, and I'd focused all of my research on autism and ADHD. And the stigma around autism and the misunderstandings around it are insane. The way that people come at it, it's just, as a general public, we are so undereducated about it. And I recognized that I was really in an echo chamber of people who had really researched and dove into this and understood their experiences better. And I felt like most of what we're combating is stigma and misunderstanding. And I just wanted to try and put it out there in a way that was more understandable for people, that's neuro-affirming, that makes them feel like this is not some like terrible problem, but it is something to better understand and become friends with. And it just really, I was very passionate about it. It was a great experience to write about it. But yeah, I just really wanted to a lot of the way the DSM is written, many of we who are late diagnosed never saw ourselves in that. Just the different ways that are, like, for example, having narrow interests makes it sound like you're not very interested in things.
That's true.
You know,
Yeah.
right? The emphasis is on what you're not interested in. And for me, I was always fascinated with something. I was always getting into something, whether it was psychology or quantum physics or anthropology or a certain author. I was always obsessed with something. So it just never felt like that was a narrow interest at all. And it was only when I started looking into the actual autistic experiences that I realized, oh, what they call narrow interest is actually a very intense interest that teachers and parents are unable to point you away from. They want to redirect your interest towards what is important to them. And if that's not interesting to you, we're not very attracted to it. We're not going to get a lot of dopamine from it. We're already getting our fix over here and we want to stay there. And so that feels narrow, but it's just that it's hard to redirect for people.
Okay, well, that's a good example. I would like to dive in a little bit more too, into the other, like, so we're talking about high functioning autistic folks in this conversation mostly, yeah?
Yeah, mostly it's late diagnosed, high masking people who are coming to the realization later in life. Most people who are over the age of 18 who are autistic were not caught. Somewhere around 80% of women, for example, who were not identified as a child who are autistic were not identified as a child. And it's similar numbers across the board, but even worse for women as usual. So yeah, it's very much the audience is people who are trying to navigate their lives, who have had challenges that are social challenges that have been very daunting and dominating, but from relationships to jobs and just basic misunderstandings, that finally, when you start to understand autism, that your life through this lens begins to make sense. That cohesion comes where there has been none. Instead of seeing that I had, 6 jobs and I had different bad luck at each job, a different thing go wrong at each job. And the only common thing is me. I must be bad at my job. And you recognize that, oh, no, the common thing is my social interactions with the hierarchy, my social interactions with the bosses that is really getting in the way here. And you just never really think that that's the case because you know that you're so logical and truthful about things. How could that go wrong?
So how could that go wrong?
I know, yeah.
Yeah, how could it go wrong? However, so social, that's a big part of the autistic experience, right? Is social challenges. And how would you describe them? Like, how would you, I mean, you hinted at authority as being one of the areas.
Yeah, in authority, like that's one of those ones where, again, the way that the sort of like diagnostic language is phrased, doesn't really check out with the experience, where you hear them say something like they don't understand authority or they don't understand hierarchy. And I'm thinking, of course I understand it. I've seen those charts that show who's the boss of who, and I understand what decisions are made on what level. But that's a really logical understanding. And the difference is I've come to realize that the typical person has a very instinctive understanding of hierarchy, that they have some sort of internal mechanisms that alert them to hierarchical dangers, the ways to carry themselves differently in different situations when dealing with hierarchy. Just for example, bosses will do this sort of like thing where they say that you know they're friends with you and they treat you like a friend, but then somewhere in there they slip in a sort of implicit demand. And I will just miss that entirely. Like I think we're just discussing something, and then it turns out that I was given marching orders at some point and had no idea, because I was just relating with a coworker in my mind. It's You see what I mean? Like for example, I might be talking to an administrator and I might be in charge of a department. And the administrator says, I really don't like how this person's handling their history class. I think that it doesn't make any sense. And it's just not the way that I was taught. And I might say, yeah, I don't really like it either. It's not super logical to me. I feel like you could do it this and this way and it would be better. And then a couple weeks later, have the administrator say, so did you take care of that problem? And I'm like, what problem? The teacher who's teaching history the different way. And I'll go, well, I didn't know it was a problem. I just thought that we were agreeing that that's not how we would do it.
You mean like a generalization? It wasn't, they weren't saying directly, Soul?
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
struggling with the way you're teaching. They
Yeah.
want you to read between the lines kind of and say like,
Right.
oh,
They want you to.
so that's
Yeah.
like that person is avoiding confrontation, right? They don't.
Yeah. They don't want to, because they,
Do
yeah,
their
they want to be
job.
friendly. Yeah. They don't want to just,
I
they,
don't
yeah,
want
they
to hurt your
want to,
feelings, but yeah,
yeah,
okay, you're
yeah.
fired. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it can come across as defiant. You say the wrong thing at the wrong time, where like there may be something that's being discussed that is very much their pet project, their best idea. And you go, oh, this doesn't make sense. We're going to waste a lot of money doing this. And I always said, well, let's look at the research. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And they don't like that. You know, they like, no one's doing that. They'll be like, well, let me tell you why that doesn't work here. And I'm like, this is your instinctive understanding, and that's not really what we need to go with. But yeah, so that's like an example. Another example is building friendships is very different for autistics than neurotypicals. Small talk is really tough for me because in general, autistics see discussion as information exchange, that you use words to trade information back and forth. And small talk is essentially this way of seeing if you vibe with somebody. It's very low risk. You make immediate observations about the immediate world, and anybody can say them and not be wrong. And it just kind of goes back and forth like, oh, it's Monday. Yeah, sure is. And, you know, right. The traffic was terrible today. Yeah, I can't stand traffic. And so
How
nobody's
about that rain. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so nobody's wrong. They're just making casual observations. And the neurotypical will go away from this conversation thinking, well, he was a pleasant chap. I would like to do that again. And they will slowly get through these layers, getting deeper. And it's as if like a fencing match where at first you're just practicing, or it's tennis and you're just rallying the ball, but then you see an opening, so you hit a little harder and see if they can hit it back. And then, so it gets deeper and deeper on these different levels. And for me, if it's not interesting, if it's not new information, I'm not super interested in discussing it. So I don't feel this sort of like building of camaraderie that they may be feeling in those things. Instead, I'm getting kind of anxious about what are they getting at. And basically, neurotypicals make friends by a process of frequency and in length. The longer they're around somebody, the more often they see somebody, they become friends. And I don't have this verified that it has something to do with very active mirror neurons, that they will end up matching each other and sort of blending into a sort of friendship together. And autistics have underactive mirror neurons. That's why we don't socialize very well. And we tend to miss a lot of these layers of basically like cultural communication going on, that it's not written anywhere. Everybody just learns it from each other. And so I will jump to something very deep and people will think I'm being very trusted here. You're opening up to me and I feel like I can open up to you. And that can be a good thing. But then later on, they might feel like, oh, I shouldn't have shared that. You know, that was an overshare. Or it makes them uncomfortable immediately. Like, oh, I didn't want to hear about your mom. You know, we weren't there yet. But I just miss all these layers. So it's really hard to sort of build that trust and friendship and to move down at the right level, because you risk either oversharing or not reciprocating and coming across as cold. So eventually, an autistic person will become very self-conscious. You need things like very direct invitations to do things where other people may generalize, like, hey, a bunch of us are going to grab a drink after work. And like, sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
have
you have no
fun.
idea. Yeah, exactly. Have fun. Yeah. And I'm like, or I'll share what I'm doing after work. Oh, I'm going home to do this and that. And it sounds like I'm making an excuse, but I just
Yeah.
thought we were talking about what
Yeah.
we're doing after work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so
So
autistics tend to,
vague conversations are very confusing to an
yes,
autistic person.
we like things to be specific and to be, clear up ambiguity. It's a thing called context sensitivity that autistics are very sensitive to context. They need to have more included in order to make conclusions based on what's being said. For example, like in a math class, I always wanted to know why. Like, well, why are we doing the quadratic equation? How did they figure this out? And that sounds like I'm challenging. It sounds like I'm saying to the teacher, we're never going to do this in life. And that's not what I mean. I just like I want to engage with this so they understand it because it feels very abstract to me otherwise.
Right.
And to a math teacher especially, like it just makes sense. It's elegant. Why would you challenge this?
I think you're touching on the thinking style too of an autistic
Yes.
person versus a neurotypical person. And I don't know, maybe
Mhm.
let's finish up with the social,
Let's do. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry.
and we can get back to we'll switch to the thinking
Yeah.
processes that are different because I think it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. So like how autistics can tend to build friendships better around interests. If you're interested in something and somebody else is interested in it, this provides you a sort of small talk simulator where if I'm really into Star Trek and you're really into Star Trek, we can talk about a character, an episode, an engineering puzzle or something. And now we're talking about something where we're not exposing anything of ourselves. We're vibing together. We have something in common. Now we can go see a Star Trek movie together, or we could, go to a convention or something. And it gives you a sort of forum to build a friendship around an interest. And that's much more sort of familiar territory because information is being exchanged and it's also not personal. So you're comfortable doing it for a while until you're comfortable with this person. And then you can get really deep really quickly in friendships. And that's a double-edged sword too. They can burn out quickly. Now you feel like you have nothing else to learn from them. The novelty's gone. Or it can become a really long friendship that, essentially doesn't have to have a lot of new ground tilled. So you can go weeks without talking to them and feel like once you talk again, like you're just back on the same page as you were. So that's very different. For me, for example, I never realized I had problems with friendships because I grew up with lots of friends and I had lots of friends as an adult. But then I had to sit back and go, wait a minute. All of my friends growing up were my brother's friends. I would get included and I became friends with them, but the expectations are totally different. I had a role. I'm the little brother. I can show up. I don't have to,
You had
so
an
some,
in. Yeah.
I had an in, right. And I don't have to manage the friendship. I don't have to make the phone call. I don't have to make the plans. And then as an adult, I was doing that with my wife. She's
Okay.
making the friendships. She's managing things. And the husband sometimes is there and sometimes isn't. And so it was very easy for me to slip in and out. And plus, she does all the small talk, right? She'll talk about me. She'll explain things about me. And then that way, when I show up, I don't have to do a lot of exposition. We just dive into what we already know. And I just never really realized that probably my whole life I made maybe one friend on my own. And that's other than that, it was very much like building from people with whom I'm juxtaposed. So it didn't look like I had friendship problems, but when it came down to it, I never really got into that territory alone because I had other people I was very close to doing it for. They're like an ambassador very often to neurotypical culture. And very often they're ADHD people because they understand something of your experience, but they have a better understanding of the social world and they can sort of translate for you. And it becomes very comfortable to go into the social world that way with a trusted person who's sort of like a liaison.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so would you say, I mean, you're referencing your own experiences a
Yes.
lot. Would you say that that's typical for autistics, or would you say that there are different variations of that?
There are different variations of that, but I see that a lot. I see a lot of people who have the sort of service person who sort of helps them into the world without really realizing that they're a big accommodation
Or they're
and have convinced themselves that I don't really want friends. I'm fine alone. because mainly they're avoiding a lot of anxiety.
This might be a good place to insert people pleasing, which is
Yeah.
another trait, right?
Hmm.
So can you describe what that is?
Yeah, people pleasing.
Obviously.
I feel like it really grows out of masking, that we are looking at, we're observing and analyzing a culture and trying to fit in with it, where neurotypicals will blend into the culture through their neuron firing in similar ways as the other people's neurons, and then trimming away unused neurons, which is the way a brain generally develops. And the autistic person has underactive mirror neurons, and they don't do as much neural pruning. So they're left with this sort of Swiss Army knife of a brain
Hmm.
that is not set in this time and place. Your brain's made for any time and place. And by age 5, if you're raised in China, there are certain word sounds you're never going to be able to make. And same thing, if you're raised in the United States, certain word sounds you're never going to be able to make by age 5 because your brain trims away those things. You're not using them. So it
Oh,
just,
interesting. Okay.
right? So it uses that, it makes neurons elsewhere. So autistics don't do that as much. And so we mask to try and fit in. We see everybody else is behaving a certain way, and it's expected of us to behave that way. We see people who cannot mask, we see autistics who cannot mask as well or whatever in our classes, and we don't want to be treated like they're treated. We don't want to be seen how they're seen. And so in one way or another, we will fall in with the much more, copious crowd of people and how they're behaving. And this is a really easy sort of step into people pleasing, that we learn to meet people's expectations, we learn to make them happy, and it makes us feel good about ourselves because we're always wondering if we're doing it right on some level. We always feel a little bit like an imposter. And once you sort of find the approval of somebody, you really want to meet their expectations. You really want to make them happy. It becomes part of your identity to make them happy. ADHDers tend to have problems, for example, in school because they don't get dopamine from doing assigned tasks. They only get dopamine if they're interested in something. Autistics are very frequently that same way, either because they have ADHD or because they have just underactive on that type of dopamine. They have to be interested. And so they can substitute as a sort of substitute goal of people pleasing the teacher or their parents. So they can do the schoolwork, get great grades, and come across as if they're good at doing their job. But really, they just want the gold star. They want to be the most impressive person that the teacher's ever had. They have to go above and beyond to really impress them, to keep getting that dopamine. And it comes a place in most students' lives where you run into a teacher who has like much more of a tough love type teaching, or they're unimpressed by you for some other reason. They don't jive with you. You don't jive with their teaching, and that can just break the whole thing apart. And suddenly you're a junior in high school and you don't care about school anymore, and you can't figure out why. It's just dead to you. And that's a shame that it happens that way. But also, we shouldn't have to be so motivated by making other people happy. But yeah, we can do that socially very much, where we become such people pleasers that we will adopt the likes and wants and boundaries of other people. We see what they say as rules that will stay forever. And really, they're just, mouthing their opinions or their feelings. And we're picking up on this as if this is some sort of creed that other people live with. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay. Yeah, just to dive into masking a little bit
Hmm.
more, how would you define masking?
Yeah. Masking is a semi-conscious process of trying to fit in with the culture. And it's a cognitive process. We have to think about it. We have to analyze things and get into things very intentionally. But we don't know that we're doing that any harder than anybody else. We
Which
assume
would
that other
make
people are
sense. Yeah.
exactly, because we assume other people's internal worlds are something like ours. Although we also feel like we're a little bit of an alien spy. Where the sort of typically way that we develop, because we're very social
Uh-huh.
creatures. We're very social creatures. We work together really well. How could we build all of this without being social? Like how we have this illusion of independence, but it's not really there. And so for most people, it's not a cognitive process, just like how learning a language when you're young is not a cognitive process. You just pick up on it. Learning that culture isn't cognitive for most people. And of course, it's a spectrum. But when you are always trying to match what everybody else is doing, you end up not really getting to know yourself very well. Where most people develop something of a personality that feels like it has sort of solid boundaries to it. And personalities are very strange things. They essentially help us connect and communicate with other people. They help us sort of locate the people who we can work best with. And if somebody lives in isolation for a very long time, much of what they think of as their personality tends to dissipate, believe it or not. It's very strange. But autistics never finish really developing that personality. Instead, we develop a lot of masking skills. We adopt what other people are wanting and liking. We take their goals and sort of make them our own. And it's cognitively exhausting. For example, they looked at brain scans of people watching regular social interactions. And typical people, when watching a regular social interaction, their mirror neuron network is lit up. And that's a very passive sort of learning. They're watching people talk and they feel as if they're playing along, right? So it's like if you could watch somebody play piano enough that you could play piano.
Okay.
Because your body feels like it's playing along. It's the same sort of act as if you see somebody get hurt on TV, you feel the pain. Like that's your mirror neurons saying, like, avoid that. Feels bad.
But that's different than empathy.
That's different than empathy. Yeah. I mean, it is very much so, I think, though they may have a common root. And then, yeah,
Well,
so
it
for an
makes
autistic,
sense that they would be tied together, but you're
Yeah.
describing, well, how would you
Yeah.
describe, what's the differentiation then between mirror neurons and empathy,
And empathy.
or the connection between the two?
It's a really good question. There's some really fascinating stuff about that. For example, as people, we tend to identify much more closely with people and animals more like us. So for example, if you watch a video of an ape getting its hand pricked with a pin, you may feel that in your hand. But if you watch a video of an alligator getting its hand picked with a pin, you won't. We do not have that same sort of network that's making us feel like we're comrades with amphibians or lizards or crocodilians than we do with other mammals and then other apes, this whole hierarchy of things in our mind. And then within people, hierarchy of things in our mind. You see people siding much more with people who look like them, people who have their color hair, people who are their gender, like it gets more and more narrow.
You mean people actually feel physical sensations when they, I mean, it could, when they see someone else getting harmed, as opposed to maybe the empathy piece then would be like imagining, like, I am, oh, if that happened to me, oh, like, that's different. I mean, not physically feeling it, but
not physically feeling it, but imagining it and being able to put yourself in their shoes. I feel like autistics are, the ones I know, are very good at that, which is strange because
very empathic, right? Yeah.
Very empathic. And it could come partially from the constant reading of people's emotions, the constant reading of the sort of like cultural weather around them, that they're very in tune with what people's emotions are, which doesn't mean that they are in tune with their motivations, because when people veil their emotions or veil their motivations and they're not obvious, it can be really hard to read into it.
Yeah.
You know, there's many times that I've thought, this person's really nice, this guy's trying to help me out at work, and found out that they were actually like literally trying to get me fired. And I would have had no idea. You know, like none. And then I feel like I must be a child to them. It must be so silly and fun. I must seem like a fool. And again, it's just that not being able to see behind the curtain, but being able to read what I should do in this situation as it's presented to me. But our masking will never fully adapt us. There will always be something a little bit off. For example, autistics, we'll do the eye contact thing when we know it's expected of us, but usually there's a trick to it. Not every autistic can't make eye contact, but many of them feel uncomfortable doing it. So usually, like for me, I always look at the forehead right in between the eyebrows. And that was usually my way of trying to keep eye contact. But when you look at how much eye contact neurotypicals do with each other, they do a different amount when they're talking to them or when they're listening. And I forget what the numbers are, but it's something to the effect of, while they're talking, they're making eye contact 60% of the time, and while they're listening, 45% of the time. Something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, something like that. It may be eye contact more when they're listening. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up.
It would make sense that an autistic has more eye contact when listening.
It would make sense.
They're observing and trying to learn from the person, right?
Right.
I mean, does that line up?
I make more eye contact when I think that I'm supposed to. So I feel like what I generally do is make much more eye contact than is typical. And then it comes across as there's something off.
Like
There's
it's too
something
much.
like a
Yeah.
little weird. And they may not know it. They may not understand that's what it was, but God, there's something with him. And then like people are like, yeah, and he never comes out for drinks after work. Yeah. And what's up with the way he teaches that? Yeah. And like eventually this can turn into like there's just something sort of uncanny valley about you. But like for me, if I'm really listening and I want to understand, I for example, in my classes, I taught my students that when they're reading their paper to me, I'm going to be staring at the ground or covering my eyes because the less inputs happening, the more I can direct my attention towards
What
what
you're
they're
hearing. Yeah.
what I'm hearing. Fidgeting too, like fidgeting is a great way to sort of focus your inputs. I don't want to get too far away from the masking thing. But as much as we try to mask, our mask will fail us because we aren't in on the different nuances that are so particular to neurotypicals. Like there's the whole stories about the ways that when a war is happening and they're trying to identify which side you're on, asking them to pronounce certain words. And the way you pronounce it shows where you grew up, shows what side you're on. And it's like that, but with these very small sort of cultural markers that we may be completely out of tune with. So
Right.
it really is. So as well as we think we mask, it still creates all sorts of problems for us because we're not doing it quite right.
So in your studies of
Uh-huh.
this and working with, I imagine both women and men,
Mm-hmm.
all genders,
Sure.
do you notice a difference between how male autistics present socially, their social
Mm-hmm.
challenges versus female
Yeah,
social challenges?
definitely. Because, women are so more heavily socialized than males are in our culture. There are more expectations put on them about how they should act and behave. And a lot of those expectations have to do with emotions and concerns about other people and caregiving. And so no matter how much you aren't socializing with the world around you, part of you is socializing. I mean, that's how you're learning language. That's how you're learning how to walk, right? Like part of this is happening. And so, the way that I sort of see it is like if men are, an example of how men aren't as socialized is boys will be boys, right? That they're allowed to behave some ways because we expect them to act out. We expect them to be a little bit violent. We expect them to be a little bit selfish. And, by a little bit, it's as much as you like want to imagine it at that given point.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so women, like, is much more expectation just from the get-go that they will behave in certain ways, and you're not being ladylike and
Mm.
everything else, and oh, you need to be clean, all sorts of things. And I mean, just the way that you dress them, like dresses and heels, that kind of thing, were meant to make it where it's obvious that you don't work. Like it was a sort of status symbol of like, your wife doesn't work. How could she possibly work in this tight skirt with those heels? It precludes any sort of physical labor, so it's a status symbol, you know.
That's an
And so
interesting
girls,
take on that, huh?
right? And so girls are brought up in dresses and skirts. You can't hang upside down in a dress. You'll get chided for it. You can't sit in the grass in a dress, like things like that. So usually when you see a woman autistic, one reason why they're not identified early is because they were seen as a tomboy. Their unsocialization had to drift through the whole typical male area of socialization. Yeah. And so they get along better with boys. They like to play boy things. They like grabbing worms, whatever. And it's just, they're essentially more free to be a little bit more themselves. And it sort of takes a lot of autism, so to speak, to get them all the way to the point where it's very obvious to everybody. Because we built all of our understandings about autism around the way boys present and about how that's different from typical boys. And so the same amount of drift from typical girl to autistic girl looks very tomboy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're much better at
Uh,
masking. It's much harder to identify. They're much more brought up to be people pleasers.
mhm.
And so even in the doctor's offices, they will begin to agree with bad assessments about themselves because they understand that it's a problem to speak up. And I mean, like down to like getting groped in a subway, that attackers will know that a woman does not want to make a scene, wants to assume that the politeness is important, wants to assume that the woman is going to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this was an accident. All of these things that assume this very heavy socialization for women. And once you can break through your own socialization to do something really screwed up like that, you take advantage of all those ways that other people are hardwired to behave in very predictable ways that avoid making a scene. That's kind of neither here nor there, but it's a good example.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why, sociopaths can get away with so much because they don't have to behave that way at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they don't mind harming people.
And they understand like how hesitant other people are to get out of the herd and, say something's wrong.
right.
Yeah,
So, so many more things.
I know.
And time is running out. So
Oh, no.
can we talk about, you don't have to go into great detail, but
Mhm.
just touch on rejection sensitivity and what you mean by that.
Yeah. So in general, autistics have trouble with friendships and autistics have trouble with jobs. There's a lot of rejection. What we find is that there's much more rejection in general in an autistic person's life than in a neurotypical person's life. And they don't know why they don't fit in, but they feel like they don't fit in and they have to act differently in order to fit in. So they get very used to the idea that if they are themselves or they are too comfortable, that they'll be rejected. And, a lot of this is they're trying to fit in with the wrong crowd and less accepting people or the people whose approval they want. And so, yeah, when that sensitivity happens, it begins to, but the real problem with rejection sensitivity is that one, it'll stop you from reaching out. It'll stop you from trying. Like we said, autistics will convince themselves that they're happier being alone, but having nice human interaction is actually really freaking good for you.
It's good for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for everybody. Like down the line.
Except maybe sociopaths. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I wonder. And, autistics, they're going to have varying degrees of social needs, but anybody wants some nice social interaction. But they'll convince themselves that it's just not even worth the risk. They'll stop taking risks. They'll stop putting themselves out there. But the worst is where they start to see rejection where there is none. And this is like, for example, feeling like you weren't invited to a party is one thing. But being invited and convincing yourself that you were invited just because they felt bad for you and they don't want you to come. That's where the rejection sensitivity really gets in the way, right? Or like, oh yeah, she's going out with me, but she probably just feels bad for me. And it's like, no, nobody does that. Nobody feels so bad for somebody else that they form a relationship with them.
Yeah, but how sad that your mind goes there.
Yeah, definitely.
And it feels real.
It does. It feels very real. And then it feels like you have to be somebody else to be accepted. And this whole process of shrinking yourself and it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, and
to
it's
get by that
also
way.
hidden. It's also hidden.
Yeah, it's very hidden. It's very veiled. And you look at the different cultural changes that we've gone through to see how different things could be. Just for example, the current generation of teenagers has a much better vocabulary of themselves than we did. So like I have a trans son, I have a non-binary kid, and at least one of my other two kids is queer. And I did not know even that many queer people growing up. And I have that many in my house. But so they have a much better understanding of themselves. There's much more acceptance of that. And even especially within autistics, that they are much more free to be that way. And if they understand themselves to be autistic, they're much more free to stim or be fascinated with something and info dump, things like that. And, my non-binary kid, like they're just obsessed with trying to gender David Bowie. They're like, if David Bowie, like if he were coming of age right now, how would he see himself?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah, so they dig through like songs, they dig through interviews, and they just love to try to come up with different ways.
Out. Yeah.
Yeah, gender fluid or agender, like, or non-binary, like what would it be? So yeah, you can imagine that when you're very rejection sensitive and you're masking and people pleasing, that you're going to act how you're expected to act, and you're not going to make those changes. And
I mean, get lost in the process.
You get lost in the process. And we see even neurotypicals in some ways do that. Cause like, we have a big surge of people coming out later in life as bi or gay who've lived their whole lives not knowing that they were, because they were, and that's tragic too. Yep. So like everybody's like afraid that, oh, everybody's turning gay and everybody's turning autistic. And what we're really seeing is this one-time change in our culture where people are coming to this realization, and we're not going to see that many people changing over to it at once ever again, ideally, because they'll grow up knowing more about themselves and they won't have to make that big change.
But you're also just demonstrating how incredibly judgmental of a culture that
it is
that we live in. And it's opening up though. And with the
Right.
younger generations, as you're pointing out. So,
Yeah. And it's like, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was saying that, growing up in the 80s, there was this weird obsession for a while with Japanese culture in 80s media. And there was a lot about how strict they are and look how they behave this way. And isn't it weird? And and it's just because we can see the differences in somebody else's culture much more than we can see the nuance in our own. We think we're behaving regular and they're
Right,
behaving in a
right.
really weird, restrictive way. And that should really clue us into deconstructing our own culture and going, wait, what ways are we forcing people to act in ways they
Please.
don't want to?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
wild.
So let's touch on thinking styles, right? How would you, because you described in your book, you describe an
Hmm.
interesting thinking style of an autistic person versus a neurotypical person. So
Yeah.
lay it on
Okay.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So bottom up thinking is typically what an autistic person does. And it's different from top down thinking in that top down thinking starts with knowledge that they already have and are assuming about something. And then they make generalizations from there, where autistics tend to build a bigger picture from the ground up. The example that's usually given is like going into a restaurant. A neurotypical person will typically know what a restaurant is. And it's this sort of like within that experience, there are smells, there are sounds, there are people rushing about, taking orders, there's food moving around, people sitting down and eating. And for an autistic person, those are all very different stimuli that are not filtered out as much. So we're hearing a lot of the sounds at the same time, or getting a lot of the smells and not filtering it. The background music may be too loud. We're not filtering that out. And that's essentially a lot of what autism is we're not on the same wavelengths, so we're not filtering out as much stimuli.
Right.
So that thinking sort of leads to this difference between inductive and deductive, between putting the parts together or between assuming parts. And it's much more energy efficient to think top down. Your brain knows that it's using way too much energy to think. So it wants to put its resources in the most important places. Only think when you absolutely have to. So for example, if somebody says 4 plus 4, you go 8, no problem. But if they go, 42 times 12, now you have to stop and think. So moving into that system too is really hard to make yourself do. But for an autistic person, they're slipping into system 2 a lot to try and decode what's going on and better understand it. We don't build as many cognitive shortcuts. And cognitive shortcuts can be inaccurate, but they can also be very friendly to, having enough information to get by without, quote unquote, overthinking. So the best example that I can think of this from my experience that I wish I had thought of when I was writing the book, and I asked them if I could put it in during the audio recording, is I used to teach this class about media literacy. And what we would do, one of the sections was analyzing print advertisements. And I'd put up a series of print advertisements and I would say, listen, in order to help them analyze this, I wanted to give them a little schema. And I said, we're going to look at 3 different levels of meaning in each ad. And I'll say, number 1 is you just want to list literally what you see here. What is this a picture of? What is happening in this picture? Okay, number 2 is the advertiser's intended meaning. And anybody can probably figure this out because they're made to communicate something. So what's the intended meaning of this ad? And then number 3 is what stereotypes or cultural norms are they using to communicate that meaning based on what's literally here?
Okay.
And I just thought this is the perfect tool to give them so they can do this. And then I'd put up an ad. We start in the 50s because it's easier to see stuff that's, not in our immediate world. Put up this ad from the 50s and I'd say, okay, so level 1, what do we see here? And somebody would say, Coke is delicious and refreshing. And I go, no. What level 1? What do you see here? And they say, happy people like Coke. And I'm like, no. And they, Coke makes you happy. And I'm like, no, you see a girl smiling in a swimsuit holding a Coke bottle. And they go, oh. And I'm like, that's so weird. And I realized that their top-down thinking skips right over the details to the conclusion. It skips right to that meaning.
But why aren't they talking about the picture that they're seeing?
Right. Exactly. It jumps right to the top down. It like in every single time it did this. And I'd be like, I would think like, wow, these kids are really like not trying or they're not analyzing very well at all. I'm glad I did this. And it's just basically, they're jumping to that generalization.
Doing them a favor.
Right. But then that'll come up again socially. You might be arguing with somebody and you might say, listen, when you decided that we were going to go dancing and I told you that I don't like dancing, that I really wanted to go to dinner, that really kind of bothered me that you didn't show that sort of care for me. And, I just want to make it clear that I would like to not do that again. And then they might go like, I'm sorry that you think I'm a terrible person. And you go, no, you're saying I don't care for you at all. And no, I'm like, this is one really specific thing. I didn't want to go dancing on Friday.
It's
And I
not a
felt like you didn't,
generalization.
yeah, I felt like you didn't consider my feelings when you picked the activity. And they're going, well, I'm sorry that I don't consider your feelings. I'm sorry I'm so awful. And I'm like, wow, like that's not what I'm the more specific you get, the more personally they take it. Now, and then in the same argument, a neurotypical person might get very angry and say something globally insulting, like, you're such a jerk, I can't believe we ever got together. But they can fall back on, I didn't mean it, I was upset, I shouldn't have said that, because it didn't point out anything specific. But if you are a bottom-up thinker and you point out specifics, the other person feels like, dang, they're picking me apart. They're taking notes, they're holding things from years ago and bringing it up again, because we're seeing patterns and pulling out things. And it's
really
supposed
helpful.
to be
Yeah.
right, isn't it? And it's supposed to be very, very specific, pointed feedback that, like, if we could just fix this, everything else gets fixed. But instead, it feels like, wow, I did not know you saw me this way. I didn't know that you held all of this against me all these years. And it's like, whoa, no, that's not.
No, that's not what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
exactly.
No,
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yikes.
Yeah.
All right.
Wild. And you know, and usually those arguments won't come up for a while because of the people pleasing.
Right. Right.
You know,
right.
but then once they do,
that's true.
yeah, once you bite the apple, you can't unbite the apple. And then personal problems will become bigger and bigger just based on those two thinking styles. And it's really hard to get people to bridge from one to the other.
Okay, so that is a very distinct differentiation. So what I want to touch on before we're winding down here is you are encouraging people to self-diagnose. And what brought you to that conclusion?
Access is such a problem. It depends on what state you live in, what insurance you have, how many people there are to do the diagnostic. During the pandemic, you have a lot of people staying home by themselves, dealing with their own world and not masking. And so right as lockdown is lifting, you have a lot of people like me who are like, oh, I didn't know we wanted to go back to normal. I thought we hated that. And I can't do it anymore because I've spent all this time unmasking. And so all of a sudden, like, if you're trying to get a diagnosis, there was like years long waiting lists. We do not have enough medical health professionals for enough people in the country on any level.
It's
much
a
less
very
people
involved assessment too.
It's a very involved assessment. Like, altogether, it took about a year and a half from the beginning of my assessment to the final paperwork. And for me, it was free because I had bougie insurance at the time and I was referred to the right person. And I think in California in general, it's more affordable because we have a law that says that mental health has to be treated the same in insurance as physical health, but many states don't have that. So it's like extra, or don't cover diagnosis for something like that at all. So you're out of pocket $3,000 or something, and for what? Essentially to find out that you're distrusted on another level, because a lot of us feel like, well, once I get the official diagnosis, then I will stop feeling like what's the word? Dang it. Imposter. Thank you. My God.
Imposter, yeah.
Yeah. They'll say, once I get the official diagnosis, I will stop feeling like an imposter in this autistic community, the same way I felt like an imposter in the neurotypical community. And my family will believe me. They'll stop thinking that I'm, And not once. I haven't seen anybody show up with their diagnosis and have their mom go, wow, you were right. You are autistic. It's always like, oh, that doctor doesn't know. Anybody can get that. It's a trend.
Well, I want to speak to that because is it trendy? I mean, because there's a lot of people becoming very popular with neurodivergent reels and social media posts. And I mean, I've heard people say things like, well, we're all on the spectrum. And
right.
To me, that's dismissive of people who are actually really, truly struggling with autistic traits.
Yes, definitely.
So what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that we're all on the spectrum it's something that I think people say to comfort themselves, to comfort the situation. It's uncomfortable to be faced with something that somebody who I have known for a while may have something different happening that I've noticed. And it also accompanies just a complete lack of knowledge about autism. Yes, all people do have autistic traits because autistic traits are human traits. So very often, one of the very difficult things for an autistic person when they're trying to convince somebody that they're autistic, they'll say, listen, do you remember that one time when you said this and I thought you meant that? And the person will say, that happens to everyone. I'll say, okay, it happens to everybody once, but it doesn't happen to everybody all the time,
All the time.
and it's
Yeah.
hard to communicate the frequency that this kind of thing might happen. Or it can be like, I have to mask through things, and they'll say, I have a customer service voice. Like, I go to the dentist, I mask there. And you go, yeah, but that's not supposed to be fun. I masked at my birthday party. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to fit in at even the fun stuff. It's anxiety inducing to do anything. And so it's really hard to get at like that frequency with which these traits are stacked in an autistic person's lives.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
the
saying we're all,
desire to be acknowledged or seen, and like
yeah,
it's like this hasn't been
exactly.
easy. This is
Yeah.
actually really challenging. That the amount of
Yeah.
energy you're describing that goes into
Hmm.
getting through a day is
Yeah.
intense. Like between how much energy your brain is using to just
Uh-huh.
think, and how much your nervous system is processing all of the information because your brain hasn't pruned, so you're
Yeah.
just taking in a shit ton of information all the time
Right.
and trying to make sense of the world, and then also trying to make sense of your social exchanges and how you're going to
Hmm.
fit in and how you're going to plan this interaction with so and so,
Right.
and then just like your relationship with your body in general. You
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
touched on that, but
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, and you're hitting on something. The number that's thrown around a lot, and I have not found where this number originated. It passes the sniff test, but I'm not sure, is that an autistic person's brain is using 42% more energy at rest than a neurotypical person's brain. That the default mode network is 42% more active. So all those things that you mentioned going on in the brain makes it much more exhausting. And not to mention that part of masking is not only matching people's behaviors, but restraining things that you want to do or say.
exactly, yeah.
And that's more exhausting than decision making. Restraining yourself, it feels odd. Like, for example, for me, an example of restraint, I have a sort of a bad relationship with food. If I go to a movie and I have a pack of M&Ms and my wife has a pack of M&Ms, hers will last her the whole movie. But for me, if I have those M&Ms, I'm either thinking about them or eating them.
Mm.
And I will try to get it to last past the previews or whatever. And at some point, I'm like, I am ruining my whole experience sitting here thinking about the M&Ms. And I'll just like, boom, I'm just going to eat them. And that way it's out of my mind. Because that restraint is what I'm feeling. I want to eat them. When am I going to do it? And what's acceptable? How long should they last? It's wild.
It reminds me of like how many systems you have to create in order to get through too, like to manage.
Right. There's so many systems. Exactly.
And if anybody knew the systems,
Right.
be like, what the fuck are you
Oh,
doing?
no, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. If anybody knew all those systems that you're constantly toggling and,
But
you know,
you
the way you
create them,
ritualize things.
right?
Yeah, you create them.
In order to like it's like a way of making sense of your experience in order, putting
Yes.
things in order and helping you to remember things and whatever. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like they're all
I mean, like, you know,
strategies. Yeah.
yeah, that's why, you know, we hear this thing about how autistics do things repetitively. They don't like change. Because it's basically, if you have things be predictable, then you're not crunching as many numbers, and it's sort of like neurotypical simulator if you're in the same room all the time, because you don't have to think about everything. And so like with my
And
kids,
less energy.
yeah, exactly. Like with my kids, we like to watch a couple TV shows every night, and we'll cycle through them. Like we're watching Lost and Survivor, or we're watching X-Files and Severance or whatever. And they find that very comforting. But if I say something like, hey, why don't we watch a movie tonight? You know, why don't we watch Good, Bad, and the Ugly? Then they'll be like, it's
Oh.
just not enough warning. We could watch it next week. Like they need to know that it's going to be a movie and not the regular show well ahead of time.
We were
Because
planning on
they were planning on the show.
usual
And
routine. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like that times 1,000 just in every facet. And it's, yeah. So it's a cognitive burden. And I don't even remember which one we were talking about at this point. They all bleed together so well. It was
we were
something
talking about
good,
thinking. Well, yeah, we were
You had
talking about what were we?
I don't know, you had a really specific question. It was really good. Huh. Oh, about we're all on the spectrum. Exactly.
Oh, that one.
Yes,
Oh, that
that's right.
comment. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because so all autistic people are on a spectrum, right? That the spectrum is there so you understand that autism is very different for lots of different people. For example, like I don't have mathy autism, but evidently my dad did, and my dad also had language autism. he could pick up languages like crazy. He spoke like 7 languages, and he could do complex math in his head. And I didn't get either of those. So, so what a rip. But I'm pretty decent with English. But, and some people will not be able to communicate at all orally. That's the extent to which they weren't able to socialize that part of their brain. And so when somebody says I'm autistic and they go, well, you don't look like my cousin Billy who can't live independently. Yeah, but
Nonverbal,
because
or
we don't all look like cousin Billy. Like that's one way, but the spectrum is meant to communicate, to put your expectations down, because any 2 autistic people on average have a more different brain than each other than they do from a neurotypical person. So we're more different from each other than not. But the fact that we're not neurotypical is what makes us all the same at all. And so the spectrum is meant to denote people who are autistic. We can make a spectrum for all people, but it becomes meaningless because then we aren't talking about anything.
well, and you're talking about actual physiological differences in
Right.
how our brains are working.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The actual different way that they're put together and functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a difference.
Yeah, it's a difference. Yeah, and if we all could get fMRI scans, then we could diagnose people instantly. And honestly, that would be cheaper if we had the equipment, because then you're just paying a tech to look at things, or you're putting it through a machine model that can recognize things, and it would save hours of work for somebody who's paid hundreds of dollars an hour. But instead, because of the way things work in our world, we have everything backwards economically. We don't do it that way. And instead, we have to go through these long processes, and it makes us feel very alien. It makes us feel very much like imposters. People still don't believe us because they don't like to step out of their comfort zone of belief of how the world works. And it takes a long time to chip away at it. It took a long time for my family to accept it. It took a long time for anybody to accept it. I came out about it very slowly. I didn't want to throw it at everybody. I don't think there's a problem with that. I have a friend who had an autism coming out party, and I think that's fun. But
That's cute.
but for me, like at work, I would say something like, we were talking about something that came up about accommodations or neurodivergence or whatever. I would say, well, as many of you guys know, I'm autistic and la la la. And I felt like saying, as many of you know, made it sound like this wasn't new, like I've been open about it, and make them kind of go, ooh, was I not paying attention? And then that sort of saved me from getting a lot of questions. Yeah, right. So,
If you're paying attention, you probably would have figured it out. But
right, exactly. Exactly.
that's a you problem.
Right.
So I had another question I was going to ask real quick. So you have this very thorough book, which is super helpful for anybody who's curious about themselves or want to understand people in their lives who are struggling with autism. So you also work with people, as you referenced, I think you referenced earlier, as a coach. And then you also work with people in groups. So why don't you talk a little bit about the way you are helping folks?
Yeah. The book is obviously a really big outreach effort to hopefully give people a place to start. Coaching, one-on-one coaching, is pretty intense. We meet virtually these days and talk about whatever it is that the challenges that we have and goals that we want to come up with, and basically sort of deconstructing the fact that a lot of us have been living a life that's not a good fit for our particular autism. And we want to redefine our goals. We want to redefine the way we want to live. We might not be chasing money as much anymore. We might be chasing more time. We might be chasing more peace, different relationships. So there's a lot that goes into it. And then to try to increase access from there, because I only have so much time that I can do that, and it's expensive, I made a community, and the community is called the Neurospicy Community. I just tried to make something that's kind of easy to search. So it's at neurospicycommunity.com, and basically there we do 12 different support group meetings every week. We have message boards, and I put some general video courses up so people can better understand it and better understand challenges of ADHD and autism. And it's been a really great project. It's a much more affordable price, and people from all over the world are there. We've been trying to diversify our time offerings because it's really hard for the people in Australia and Thailand to show up sometimes. So we're trying to spread that out and trying to get more into the depths of autism, like stuff about, some have to do with work, and some have to do with relationships, and some of the support groups have to do with being a woman. So I have a variety of leaders who lead these groups, but I lead a majority of them myself. And it's really great because you really get to feel, like you've been saying, you really get to feel heard, you get to feel understood. And for most of us, it's like the first time in our lives. We have 70-year-olds in there who have never understood themselves as well as they do now. And it's been wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's big.
So you gave the
.com.
neurospicycommunity.com, and then what's your other website?
The other one is professorsoul.com. And from there, you can that's sort of home base. You can bounce out to the community or find the book. But that's also where the coaching is housed at professorsoul.com.
Okay. And then I also have to ask, have you been listening to the telepathy tapes, or have you listened to them?
I listened to the first episode. Okay. I dig the paranormal. I dig things.
A little too out there for you?
No, okay. I'm only going from the first episode. But the first episode, there were too many bridges of communication happening. There was too much translation happening with people who were really trusted. And I don't doubt that many of these people might believe that that's what's happening. But okay, so there was this thing. I don't remember if I talked about this in my book or not. I talk about it I think in my second book, which isn't out yet. That there was, I can't remember his name. There was a horse. And this horse, it was a German horse, and it was amazing. This horse could do math. So they'd bring it up in front of a crowd, and they'd say, what's 2 plus 2? And it stamps out 4. And people are like, okay, well, they probably taught it that. So they would start asking it more and more complex things. What's 3 times 3? And it would do 9. And everybody's cheering. This is amazing. And to the point where the owner just felt like, I have an amazing horse. He knows
I think
math.
they referenced this story in a later episode, actually.
Do they really?
Because
Okay.
of the skepticism.
That makes sense.
Have. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because of what you're probably getting to is watching the cues of the humans.
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
just a subtle little cue the horse is watching and then giving a response in
right. Horses have been bred for centuries to understand human body language. They're very sensitive and in ways that we don't understand. So even the owner felt like this was a nearly magical horse, but eventually they sort of decoded this. And I feel like, at least in that first episode, these people know each other too well. The people who are translating for each other, you have a kid translating for a grandma. The grandma can't speak to the host. There's just so many different bridges going on here.
Well, yeah, that first one was, Spanish speaking.
Right. And that's cool. It's just that, like, this going through those different steps gives a lot of ways to sort of generalize and then focus in a way that feels very confirming, the same way that you might do a cold reading or something. And I don't want to take away from it because, like I said, I should listen on.
Yeah,
I really should.
I would recommend because they do address the skepticism. They have a whole episode on the skepticism. And
well, that'd be good, because one of the things with the first one is they went on and on about how much the camera guy believed it and how much the sound guy believed it. And then I'm like, okay, I don't want to hear about how much they believe it. Like, you got to convince me. And like, I don't want to fall into belief like through transitive property. But listen, like I have read so many books about psychics and remote viewing and stuff like that the government was experimenting with, and I don't have any reason not to buy it. Like I really like, and if I'm not sure, I would choose to buy it because it's much more exciting to sort of examine those things sometimes. So I'm not totally against it. I just felt like with that first episode that I was reading a psychology book. Yeah, and the enthusiasm was so high. And okay, I bring a natural skepticism the minute it's recommended to me too many times. You know what I mean? And I hate that. It's like when everybody's like, oh, you've got to see this movie. You got to see this movie. And then pretty soon you hate that movie. Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, demand avoidance. Yeah. And then you finally see the movie. You're like, okay, it was good.
Well, right. I mean, I only say that because, I mean, I think my interest is consciousness and
cool,
how expansive it is, and how it's territory that we don't know much about. It's very mysterious, and having a lot of direct experiences, and its reality is complicated. Beyond,
I agree.
Much beyond the materialist. Materialism is part of it, but there's a lot more beyond that. So
there's actually a degree that I would love to get. I'm Googling it to make sure I get it right. Oh, come on. It's from a school it's a college in San Francisco area, and they have a master's
integrative studies. What is it?
It's philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness.
Yeah.
And love that idea because finding links between those things, I think, is essential for understanding how the world works
Right.
and finding our perception of the world is what's designing how we think the world is. But yeah, our consciousness is part of that perception.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like you can
Be-
only know enough about your brain as your brain is willing to tell you.
and then how much do we shut our brains down with our
Yes.
belief systems? So, like the
Right.
belief that that's not possible all of a sudden makes that not possible to you,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
totally. My dad used to say that like we describe the world to our kids when they're born and that it constantly narrows their possibility the whole time.
Exactly. And
You
that,
know,
talk about,
that
yeah, that's sort of like cognitive pruning in a way.
yeah, it's like, this is blue. And we know that hundreds of years ago, we don't think people saw blue. That it's not a word, like, for example, that's in the Odyssey or the Iliad. The ocean is never described as blue. The sky is never described as blue.
That's
Nothing
fascinating.
is ever
Huh?
blue. Yeah, that like they did not perceive the sky to be that. They thought the sky was gray or green. They thought the ocean was dark. It's commonly called the wine dark sea. They either thought it was black or gray or green. It was never blue. And
Fascinating.
yeah, so we tend to separate these things out later and then all sort of follow that description. So I think that designs our very perception, honestly.
One of the things that the reason why I wanted to ask you about that,
Yeah.
because I assume you've been asked that question a lot about the telepathy tapes, is that
Hmm.
I wonder if people with autistic traits on the entire spectrum
Hmm.
have a greater propensity for expanding their consciousness because of the way their brains are wired.
I think that probably that yeah, it checks the sniff test, and honestly, I think that it's probably something that would be even stronger if you're very affirmed from childhood.
Yeah.
Like for sure, if you're affirmed in those types of things. My parents were full of stories about little things that we would say as kids that were clearly like
Where'd they get that from?
correct psychic messages.
Yeah.
And I loved hearing those stories, and I saw that in my kids too. And it's amazing how much, yeah, how much that we begin to, our belief system changes everything. And
Yeah, well,
yeah,
yeah, and the fact that an autistic nervous system is picking up so much information that some of that information may be non-physical,
yeah, yeah,
or
and
beyond emotions and that kind of thing. But
right, and I think that it's fair to recognize that we do know that there's a lot of stuff that is not within our spectrum of experience, like certain colors and stuff that we're able to detect without our eyes. So, and if none of us ever saw, we wouldn't even know the difference in lots of
right,
ways. If
yeah,
nobody ever saw, we wouldn't have a word for blindness, right?
exactly, exactly,
Yeah. And so, just for like taking this to the extreme, for all we know, we're much like plants in that we're being farmed by some other creature that's harvesting something from us, and we wouldn't know. Like this is how we would experience that because our evolution or our breeding would not have brought us to being able to be aware of what they are or perceive what they are. How does a spider see me? How does a tomato plant see me? Like we have no idea.
right.
What's their perception of it? And
The hard question.
yeah. And so our perception is very much focused on what kept us alive walking through a forest and living in the veldt.
Hmm.
And it hasn't changed really since then. Um,
Right, right,
But
yeah.
before then, like who knows? I always like to think about old stories. Like I like to read old books, and it's very sad to read of like, witch hunts or something. But it's very interesting to read deeper into some very specific stories where you see that like something like a witch or a monster or something felt so real to them, that it didn't feel like a myth or this is a folk tale. It felt present and real, and that it molded a lot of what they did. I mean, obviously, eventually to a fallacious point, though, witch hunts were very much a Christian excuse for getting rid of a lot of people.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I've read somewhere before that a lot of pharmacology really started with the grimoires from women who they executed.
Yeah,
Aspirin, St. John's
plant
wort.
medicines, yeah.
Yeah. That checks
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I appreciate you going down that little rabbit hole with me.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I love thinking about consciousness. I'm rereading the Carlos Castaneda series now.
And there's
every so often I
controversy
have
on
to.
that, whether
There is.
it's fiction or not. Yeah.
Totally. And it's one of those things that it's like, a lot of it really feels like fiction and a lot of it doesn't. But a lot of it, when it doesn't, it feels like it's doing that thing where it doesn't matter because it's saying something true. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
So
Yeah.
whatever you garner from it, I guess that's what's important.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sol, this has been fun. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. It
Thank you.
definitely hit close to home.
Good. Hey, I really appreciate your patience. Thank you so much. And thank you. Like, I have to start listening to your show because I love how you're doing this.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. You remind me of somebody. Just
Weirdo?
somebody from my, somebody from my life who, this is exactly the kind of show she would do. I haven't seen her for years. But anyway, yeah, just one of those things where suddenly somebody's echoing from like somebody who was transformative in your story.
Oh, okay, cool. So it wasn't an asshole. All right.
Oh, no. She was wonderful. Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
All right.
And you
man,
seem very comfortable. You seem very comfortable with yourself in a way that makes me feel like you've had a really difficult run.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry if that sounds insulting.
No, I appreciate that. It's an interesting observation and probably very accurate.
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned it in my book, and if you've read the whole thing, like my wife came to an understanding for sexuality later in life, and it's just changed everything about her life before then, and everything about my life before then. And the same thing with like autism, that like when you come to these things later in life and you go, man, what would have been like without all the friction that brought me to this sort of violent understanding of myself. Anyway, I think that it ends up producing somebody who's more comfortable in their skin than people who have just been affirmed and following the pack. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I could see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So I appreciate
I'm not trying to generalize or make
feedback, yeah.
assumptions. I'm
No,
sorry.
man, no, I appreciate it very
Okay.
much. No, that was cool.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Man, we sure covered a lot of ground in our conversation, didn't we? If you'd like to learn more about Sol, his work, or to get a copy of his new book, The Autistic's Guide to Self-Discovery, please visit professorsol.com. A link will be in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Next up on Lucid Cafe, we'll be taking a trip into the cosmic zone. Where we'll explore a fresh perspective on astrology. Until next time.